this session, so you can come back and watch it later, but also just FYI as you're participating. This will be available for you later on the Association of Counties website if you want to go back and review it. So that's just for your knowledge. If we haven't met, my name is Sandy Jones. I'm with the Idaho Supreme Court, and I am the liaison between the court and the misdemeanor probation world. And I participate in the Misdemeanor Probation Training Council, who has sponsored these quarterly trainings for you to make sure you're getting your ongoing training as required for your certification. So welcome to all of you who are participating. Today's webinar is on Interstate Compact. And somebody requested that we have this topic for you today. And so we just went straight to the source, which is Judy Messick. She is the Deputy Compact Administrator for Idaho. She has been doing this since dirt was clean. And she knows all things about the compact and the process. Nicole Case is with her, also works in the compact office over at IDOC. And between the two of them, they can explain all of the things that you might need to know when dealing with the Interstate Compact process in Idaho. So having said that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Judy and Nicole at this point. And I'll let you guys tell everyone about yourselves, and then also how you want them to handle questions. If you want people to wait until the end or interrupt you or whatever you'd prefer is fine with us.
How do you want them to do that? Oh, I'm okay if questions are asked as we go.
Okay.
That's fine.
Just come off of mute if you would like to ask a question.
Okay. Yeah, and just interrupt me. But yeah.
I'm Judy Messick. I'm the Deputy Compact Administrator for the state of Idaho and also the Commissioner for the state of Idaho. I've been doing this about 28 years, and I have great staff. Nicole Case and Kathy Hust are the ones that process all the reporting instructions and transfer requests. I have a probation and parole officer, Josh Hanchett, that does all of our outgoing people on supervision. Yeah. We actually have 2,300 plus outgoing, and we only have 640 some coming in. And that seems to be the 640 coming in always seems to be right around that number. And from the time that I started, it's always been a 3-to-1. So we are an exporting state. Everybody wants to come to Idaho on vacation, leave on probation. Probably our Panhandle District 1 is one of our busiest offices, and probably District 4, which is a huge area. So we make sure that reports of violation, when they're filed, that we bring our people back. We make sure that the judges and the prosecutors issue those warrants nationwide, no bond. So that's the big thing. But we're also audited. One thing you should know is we're also audited on every document that we pass out of here. And so if they're not timely, we get dinged. And twice this year, we have not passed our audit. And that's on progress reports. So if you get a compact action request, all I would say is please respond to it. You have 30 days. It gives you to do the progress report, and then you hit an audit list that comes to me with your name on it. I will be emailing you, asking you to get that done. But on the day-to-day stuff, if you need anything, you can call my office. You can email me. You can email or call my staff. The best email is iscidaho@idoc.idaho.org. .gov. Or .gov.
I did send out this little, well, I guess it's not little, this 4-page checklist this morning when I replied to Sandy's email. So hopefully everybody has a copy of that with them. The email address is listed on there. That ISC Idaho address, it goes to everybody in the office. So it goes to Judy, Kathy, me, Christy, and Josh. So if somebody's out of the office, you're bound to get a response from somebody. So that is always the best email address to email to. This checklist is kind of geared more towards felony stuff, cases, but basically the same information. The information is the same, but there are little differences for felony and misdemeanor, and we'll go over those when we go down the list. So I'm gonna share my screen. I'm like, where to go? Share. Can everybody see that? Okay. Okay. So I do have one case that I'm going to use just as an example that I already have in there. So I guess I want to start off real quick by explaining the difference between a request for reporting instructions and a transfer request. So the rules for Interstate Compact say that a client or an offender cannot be in another state without the permission of that other state. So when we submit a transfer request, the other state has 45 days to investigate that transfer request once we submit it to them. And the rules say that once we submit a transfer request to that other state, that the client cannot be in that state during that 45-day period unless we have asked for reporting instructions and the other state has given reporting instructions. So what reporting instructions does is it's us asking the other state to allow your client to be in that other state while they have the 45-day period to investigate the transfer request. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on that difference? So you can't send a client to another state without reporting instructions being granted or the transfer request itself being investigated and approved by the other state. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if we need some more clarification, but so that's the difference. So
Nicole, are there specific misdemeanor cases this applies to? Yes.
Yes, and I have a spot where we'll go over all of those.
Perfect.
Well, I guess we'll just go over them right now. Now's a good time.
Yeah.
So, so there's three things that have to be met for a misdemeanor case to qualify to transfer under the compact. So those three things are the crime itself. So the crime qualification would be second or more lifetime DUI conviction, assaults, so domestic battery, assaults, and then what was the other, sex offense crimes, anything that involves a gun.
Anything with perceived danger.
Yeah. So like we had a guy once where his crime was poaching and he did qualify to transfer into the compact because it involved a gun. So crimes that wouldn't qualify to transfer under the compact are like possession of paraphernalia or, like maybe injury to property or something like that. Those sorts of crimes wouldn't qualify. So second or more DUI, lifetime conviction, assaultive crimes, anything that requires you to register as a sex offender, and and then anything, a crime that involved a gun. So that's the crime element. The second is their original sentence. So the original sentence has to be 365 days or more. And then the third part is of that 365 day sentence, they have to have at least 90 days left of that supervision, 90 days left or more left of that supervision. And you have to meet all three of those criteria for somebody to qualify. So you have to meet the crime criteria, the sentence criteria, and how much time is left on probation criteria. If you're missing any one of those criteria, then the person doesn't qualify to transfer under the compact. So if you met the crime and you met the sentence, but they only have 30 days left of supervision, then they don't qualify because they don't have 90 days or more of supervision. One of the workarounds that a lot of people tend to do or like to do is instead of doing 365 days, they might do 364 days, which would put them under that year mark, which then would disqualify them from transferring under the compact. Does anybody have any questions on that? So yeah, the crime, the original sentence, and the time left of that sentence. So if you have anybody who meets all three of that criteria, then they would qualify to transfer under the compact, and you would have to submit a transfer request requesting, you know, their supervision be transferred to that other state. And if they qualify for reporting instructions, then you would also submit a request for reporting instructions. So on the first page of the checklist, the top part is just mostly talking about reporting instructions. So like if you have somebody who was just recently sentenced and they come to you and say, I was sentenced and I live somewhere else, they would qualify for reporting instructions. And you would submit a request for reporting instructions, and we would be submitting under the option of living there at the time of sentencing. The part that gets missed a lot of times is that for us to say that they lived there in the other state at the time of sentencing, the rules say that we have to be submitting our request for reporting instructions within 7 business days of sentencing or release from jail. So if they got sentenced to do some jail time, they would still qualify for reporting instructions if we're submitting the request within 7 business days of them being released from jail. If we're going past the 7 business days since they've been sentenced, they then no longer qualify for mandatory reporting instructions as living there at the time of sentencing, which then means that you're going to have to submit your request under the expedited option, which isn't good because the other option, if we do it within the 7 business days, they're what's called mandatory. So then the other state is required to give reporting instructions. If we go past the 7 business days of sentencing, then the other state, it becomes discretionary. Expedited just means discretionary. And then the other state isn't required to give them anymore. It's not mandatory. So it is very, very important that if you have somebody who was sentenced and meets all of the criteria to transfer under the compact, that you submit your reporting instructions within the 7 business days of sentencing timeline. People who were living in another state at the time of sentencing, when you're submitting the request for reporting instructions, they have to pay the $100 application fee. So at that time that they're reporting to you, for us, we use a third-party company. The Idaho Department of Corrections uses a third-party company that we use to have all of our fees, you know, that they would use to pay their fee. It's called Access Corrections. And for us to be able to charge a fee, we have to assign the person an IDOC number. So when they report to you, I would need you to send an email to ISC Idaho asking that we assign an Idaho Department of Corrections number for that person, so we could then charge a fee and then the client could pay the fee. So please always make sure to email us and ask us to do a application fee. What is the email again? Hold on just one sec. Okay, so I just
Also-
put it in there.
Nicole, just out of curiosity, are we still, correct me if I'm wrong, but were we adding like zeros in front of DOC numbers when we're sending it off? Do we still do that to make it?
Yeah, so when I'm normally responding to the misdemeanor folks, when I give them the IDOC number, I put the zeros in front for them and I say,
Oh,
the IDOC number is 0155, blah, 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 you know, whatever.
okay, that's nice of you.
So, yeah. So yeah, we do. So it's a 7-digit number, and then they'll need that number when they go into access corrections so they can pay the fee. So, but at the time, if you're requesting reporting instructions because they did live somewhere at the time of sentencing and we're submitting the request for reporting instructions within the 7 business day timeline, they can be given a travel permit that day to go home after we know that they've paid the application fee, they've signed the offender's application form, which is a waiver. If you guys collect DNA, that their DNA is collected, and that we have a photograph, because we have to have a photograph for ICOTS. Yeah, so all those things need to happen. So sign the application form, pay the fee, get a picture, collect DNA if you do that. All that stuff has to be done before you can give them a travel permit and send them home. The only people, Penny, I see your question. I'll answer it in just one second. The only other client that wouldn't qualify for reporting instructions that day is anyone who's required to register as a sex offender. It doesn't matter what their crime is, even if their crime isn't a sex offense, but if they're required to register as a sex offender because of a different crime or whatever, sex offenders do not qualify to get a travel permit the day that they're sentenced and go home. They have to wait. They have to stay in Idaho and wait until the reporting instructions are approved, and then they can proceed. So regular requests for reporting instructions, when I submit them, the other state has 2 business days to respond. But for sex offenders, the other state gets 5 business days. So, you know, if you do have somebody who's required to register, make sure that they know that they have to stay here, and it could be up to a 5-day waiting period. Transferring, I'm reading Penny's question. If we don't get a judgment until the next day and they live in another state, how do we submit it 7 days early when we don't even know when the sentencing is? Well, we can't submit any request for reporting instructions or a transfer request until somebody is sentenced. So we just have to make sure that we're submitting the request within 7 business days of sentencing, after they've been sentenced, not before. Did I answer that, Penny?
Yes, I misunderstood what you had said earlier, sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you. So yeah, it just has to be within 7 business days of sentencing and then 7 days after. So yeah, so if you have somebody who's a sex offender, just make sure that they know that they cannot be given a travel permit that day, and that they may have to wait up to 5 business days. When you're submitting a request for reporting instructions, again, like I said before, this is just us asking the other state, can our client come and be in your state while you investigate the transfer request? So just because somebody gets granted reporting instructions doesn't mean that the transfer itself has been approved. We then still have to submit a transfer request, and the other state still gets their 45 days to investigate the transfer, which in the end, it is a possibility that that transfer could be denied. So if they were given granted reporting instructions, but in the end, the transfer is denied, that person, the client, would be then required to return to Idaho, or we would have to hurry up and resubmit another transfer request with, you know, updated information or whatever the case may be. When they report to your office, we have a real big issue with addresses getting entered into ICOTS incorrectly and cases getting denied or reporting instructions getting denied because the addresses that we're providing are incorrect. So me and Kathy have been starting to look up all addresses in like Google Maps and stuff to make sure that we can to make sure that they're correct. Penny, can you give them a temporary travel permit while they're waiting? The answer to that is no, because like I said before, the rules say that once we are going to be submitting a transfer request, they cannot go to the other state unless the other state has given reporting instructions. So if the other state has not given reporting instructions, then they cannot be given a travel permit. So, like if you have a sex offender, you can't give them a travel permit to return to the other state during that 5 business days. They have to stay in Idaho and wait. So just when they're giving you their information about what their address is, who they're going to live with, the phone number and everything, you do have to call and pick up the phone and talk to the person that they're wanting to live with. First of all, we want to make sure the phone number is correct. That's another thing. Like another state will be like, oh, we can't get a hold of so-and-so because the phone number you've provided is incorrect. We want to verify that phone numbers are correct. We want to verify that addresses we're submitting to are correct. We want to make sure that the person that they're saying they're going to go live with knows that they are going to be listed on this transfer request, that, a PO is going to be contacting them from another state, and that they know the general rules of supervision for the person that's going to be living in their home. So please always pick up the phone and call and talk to the person that they say they're going to be living with. The only time, I guess the only exception to giving somebody a travel permit before reporting instructions are given is if they lived in the other state at the time of the sentencing and they're not a sex offender. You can give them a travel permit to go home that day, which is before the other state has responded to your request. You can give them a travel permit to go home if they're not a sex offender and they were living there at the time of sentencing. Once you get the reporting instructions, it is you as the officer who would then call your client and say, hey, I got your reporting instructions. You need to report to this person at this address. So the other state doesn't do that. It's the responsibility of the sending state to inform the person of where they need to report. And then once you have your reporting instructions and the person is left, I would also need you to submit a notice of departure in ICOTS. So does anybody, that's pretty much reporting instructions. Does anybody else have any questions for reporting instructions? Okay. So we are going to go down the list of a transfer request. So I will get to my person. So when the person comes to you, you always want to look in ICOTS to make sure that the person is not already in ICOTS. Once a person has a profile page in ICOTS, that's the same profile page that will be used forever for any state who has a case with this person. So normally I always look under the offenders tab at the top here, and then I can look them up by name. The person I'm looking for is this person. So when I type in his name, he pops up. Luckily, nobody else pops up, so I just already know that that's him. But I could select his name, press, continue, and it would take me to his profile page where I could then start a request for reporting instructions or a transfer request or whatever I needed to start. If you're looking at this list and you're like, oh, this Derek Leeds is not my guy, you could press down here in this little corner. There's this little black triangle. You could select that. And then, you have to swear on your life that the person's not already in the system by clicking this. And then you could press add, and it would then take you to a created profile for them. So, but for him, I am going to select him because this is my guy, and I'm going to press continue, and I have to press continue again. And then it takes you to their profile page. So for him, anytime you start something, whether it's a request for reporting instructions, a transfer request, a compact action request, a progress report, a violation report, anytime you start anything in ICOTS, you can always come back to it later if you go to this action items tab. Anything that you start but haven't finished will be in this action items tab. So you can see here that I've started a transfer request for him, but I haven't finished it. So it's here waiting for me to finish. Okay, so I'm going to just click on this view button, and it's going to take me to the transfer request. So here's the list. So for where we're going to start, I believe it's on page 2 at the top under number 10, is where basically we'll start. So the first one, offender information, it will always be checked off the list when you start it. It's just, their information. And so there's really nothing that we're entering there. So it's always just checked off. So the next item on the list is the departure date and the transfer reason. So I'm going to click on that. So these are all of the reasons that somebody meets criteria to transfer to another state. So all of these top however many reasons are all what we call mandatory, which means if they meet one of these mandatory reasons and the home offer that we're submitting to is acceptable, then the other state has to accept. So they can't just deny a case or a transfer just because they want to, especially if they meet a mandatory reason. So there are reasons to deny a transfer, but the rules say if they meet a mandatory criteria and the home offer is acceptable, then the other state has to accept. So the other option down here is a discretionary option, which just means, we know that the person doesn't meet any of this above mandatory criteria, but we still think it's in their best interest to transfer to your state. And then we have to give them all of the good reasons why. So that could be because they got a really good job offer, but they don't have any resident family there and they're not a resident or whatever, but this job would really be good for them. And, so that would be a discretionary option. Maybe it's for medical reasons or for school, or, maybe the person is not married to their significant other, but they've been together for 20 years and have 4 kids together. The significant other wouldn't qualify as a resident family member, but we still, this still may be the best option for them to be successful on supervision. So we're going to just go off this first one. So If you hover over these question marks, it will give you definitions and things. So for here, it gives the definition of a resident, or maybe I did resident family, sorry. So here's the definition of resident. So the definition used to be, where were they living for 1 full year at the time they committed their crime? But just recently, the definition changed to, where were they living? Where have they been living for at least 1 year prior to sentencing? Which is a good rule change, because sometimes it can take a while between committing an offense and being sentenced. So now it's, where were they living for 1 full year at the time they are sentenced? So that's a good change. So if you have somebody who meets that definition, they did live somewhere else for a year or more, that has to be longer than a year. So if somebody moved somewhere but they've only lived there 6 months or 9 months, they're not considered a resident because it hasn't been longer than a year. So if you have somebody in that situation, if they didn't have a qualifying resident family member, you might have to submit it as discretionary. But if you have somebody who's a resident, then you could mark that option. The next option is a resident family option. So in this section, all the little red dots are the mandatory fields that we have to fill in. For some reason, phone number doesn't have a red dot by it, but if you submit something without a phone number, we'll send it back and ask you for a phone number. And again, in this area, please make sure that addresses and phone numbers are correct. In this section, these are all of the people who qualify as a resident family member. This is not a pick the best option section. If it's not on the list, the person doesn't qualify. So mother and father-in-laws do not count as parents. Significant others, common law spouse, they do not qualify as a spouse. They have to be legally married. So girlfriends and stuff don't qualify as a spouse. Nieces and nephews and cousins are not on this list, but aunts and uncles are. And it has to be a real aunt or uncle, not my mom's best friend who I consider my aunt. Children and siblings, they have to be adults because this person has to be a means of support, and minor children and siblings can't do that. So if you're going to claim a child or a sibling, they have to be adults. So if you have somebody who has a resident family member who meets one of these criteria options, then you could also submit under the resident family option. Here it says and employment or means of support. So it's not a requirement that they have employment, but if they don't have employment, they have to have means of support, which is normally provided by whoever this resident family member is. So, after you've entered in this top information, down here is where you would enter their employment information or their means of support information. So if somebody does have employment, please fill out this employment section. I get a lot of people who will just write down here in the means of support section, that they work, at McDonald's. That is great, but I need to know which McDonald's, who's their supervisor, what's the phone number. I need all that information. So I need this section to actually be filled out if the person does have employment. In this section, under the reason for transfer section, all we're doing in this section is trying to determine how the person meets criteria to transfer. So in this section, under the resident family section, they don't have to live with this resident family member. We're just saying that the resident family member in that other state who is supportive of this person is the reason why they meet criteria to transfer. like I said, they don't have to live with this person. So if the person's significant other also lives in the same state as the client's mother, in this section, you would list the client's mother's name, address, and phone number in this section. And then there's a couple of sections down where you would list the address of where the person physically wanted to live, which would be with their significant other. And then, so then all of these other options down below, sorry, there we go. Military and employment. These don't get used too much, but they are options. So if you have somebody who's in the military, or you have somebody who lives with a family member who's in the military, then they would qualify to transfer under this military transfer options. With those types of options, if you're picking one of those, we have to have supporting documentation. So you would have to have their transfer orders that we would have to attach, and things like that. Under the employment section, employment transfer of a family member or employment transfer of the client. This is for people who currently work for a company in the state of Idaho, and that company is transferring their employment from Idaho to another state. And if they didn't take this job transfer, they wouldn't have employment. So this is not, these employment options are not for somebody who got a new job working with a company in that other state. Those types of transfers would be listed as discretionary. And then again, discretionary is, we know they don't meet any of this above mandatory criteria, but we still think it's in their best, interest to transfer to your state. And then we have to give them all the good reasons why. So then you would have to write in here all of the reasons that they would be more successful on supervision in that other state than remaining in Idaho. Is there any questions in this section under the reason for transfer section? Okay. Oh, I forgot. Okay. I'll just back out. So under then the next one is the transfer justification. In this section, we do also have to explain why they're going to be more successful in the other state than remaining in Idaho. So that could be because they have housing, employment, and family support in that other section, or in that other state. Just all the reasons that we believe they're going to be more successful in the other state. Receiving state residence section. This is the address that you're going to list of where he physically wants to live. So if they wanted to live with their significant other, and not their resident family member, this is where you would list the person that they physically want to live with. Again, please do all of the red dots and make sure that the address and phone number are correct. Please also list a phone number here. If you don't, I'll send it back and ask for a phone number. You do, again, have to call and talk to this person. You have to pick up the phone and call them. Sorry, this guy that I'm working on, he actually is homeless in Washington. And Washington told me to submit it as homeless because he's a dual supervision case. So, or normally there would be an address here. So I gotta make sure I'm not missing anything here. So in this section, if you do have somebody who is a sex offender, it doesn't hurt to look up the address in Google Maps just to make sure that it's, not across the street from the school. or the park or daycare or whatever, because more than likely, if it is, the other state's gonna deny that address. So it's always good to just look it up and check in Google Maps. So, don't need to do the apartment thing. So yeah. Any questions here? Means of support and employment, that's the same thing. So if you didn't do it above in the reason for transfer section, then you would have to fill out this information here. Instant offense details. This is where you're going to enter in their case number and the crime. So if you read this section here before, like if you unclick this, see how your submit or save and continue button goes away. But if you click this, you're verifying that you have affirmed that the cases and, offense information that you're entering is accurate and complete. Because once you submit a transfer request to our office, if any of this information up in this top section is incorrect, the only way to fix it is to delete this transfer request that you just submitted and we start all over. So it's really important to make sure that all the information that you're entering up here is correct. So just always make sure to double, triple check yourself on dates and stuff. So yeah, so when you click this, you're telling, us that you've verified that everything up here is correct. And then, it pops up with your save and continue button. But, so the sentenced on date, and normally for misdemeanors, it would be just the same. Sentenced on date and the supervision begins date is always the same. And then, then your end date. And so after you enter in the information up here, you press this add case button and it adds it down here. So then after you have all your case numbers down here, you do have to associate a crime with your case number. So then you would select your case number and then you would have to associate a crime. So, you would select misdemeanor. And if it was DUI, I just happen to know that DUI is under the traffic offense. So up here, you would pick your main category, which is just traffic offense. And then down here, if you select under the subcategory, we could do DUI. And then when I press add offense, it will automatically put in the NCIC code, because see how that has a red dot? When you press add offense, it automatically puts in the NCIC code. I'm actually going to delete that though, because it's not as crime. So then you have to do that for each case number, which I've done here. And in this section, there is an option to attach a document, but you don't have to. It's not a requirement for you to move on from this section. But most people will attach the sentencing documents or police reports or whatever in this section if you wanted to. So, yeah. So in this section, when you're choosing a crime, sorry, where did it go? All this stuff is in the way. This is a pick the best option. Like sometimes in this section, when you're picking a crimes, not everything always matches up exactly. So sometimes you can just pick the crime, just pick the best option that you can find. So, so that's for parolees. Okay. All right. So any questions in this section? Institutional history. You guys should probably always say no to this, because this is for people who are incarcerated in a facility, not people who are serving jail time. This is like for prison records. So you guys will say no in this section. Contact restrictions and protective orders, I'm not gonna click in there, but if you know if they have any, you would mark yes, and then you could attach a copy of the no contact order or the protection order. Or if you've ordered the person to not have contact with a particular person, you can list that person's name as somebody you've told them that they're not allowed to have contact with. Sex offender details. So in this section, so this bottom one is somebody who doesn't have to register and isn't subject to sex offender conditions. The one right above it, like for the felony side, we have injury to a child cases where the underlying offense was in some cases is a sex offense, but injury to a child as a crime conviction, they don't have to register as a sex offender. But if they were out on supervision, they probably would be supervised on a sex offender caseload. So that's what this is they're not required to register, but they're subject to sex offender conditions. So if that's the case for your person, then you could mark this one. They're not required to register, but they still have some sex offender conditions that they might have to follow. And then the other one, I don't ever use this middle one. The only one I ever use is the lifetime registry. So if you have somebody who is required to register as a sex offender, then you would mark lifetime registry. And if you did that and you press submit, then it comes up with another box. In this section, I would expect to see some documentation attached here, whether it's a psychosexual eval, a static 99, or some polygraphs, or especially if it's somebody who's been on your caseload for a little bit. Because just like we want to know everything, any assessments or evals that they've had done as a sex offender, the other state's also going to want that information. So any information that you have like that, that you think the other state might find helpful, I would please attach it in this section. Just as we level our sex offenders, like 1, 2, 3, or other states do that, and they need all the information they can get to help them determine what level of sex offender they are. So if they are a sex offender, please always attach some, documents here. I would expect to see something here. My guy's not a sex offender, so we're just going to leave it like that. Victim sensitive details. This section is for people who have specifically registered with your county's victim coordinators. Like they want to be notified of their movements, or want to be notified of what they're doing and things like that. Then you would mark yes, and you can put the name and phone number or email address of the victim coordinator in this section, which is what I did here. He does have a victim notification alert, so I marked yes, and then here's the address that email address that I listed. Pre-sentence investigation section. So I know misdemeanors, don't do that a lot, or they don't do PSIs or whatever. But in this section, what we're looking for is we have to have a written out description of every crime that we're transferring. So if you have somebody who has multiple case numbers, we have to have a PSI, or for you guys, it would be a police report or an affidavit for every crime that gives a written out description of what it was that occurred. So for him, he has 2 cases. One I had a PSI for, but it only covered 1 case number. So I had to go out and get an affidavit for the other case number. So like here I have a PSI and an affidavit, which covers, PSI covered 1 crime and the affidavit covers the other. In this section, it's kind of your catch-all section too. So if you have marriage certificates, employment letters, medical documentation, school letters, or anything like that, you can attach any other miscellaneous documents in this PSI section. You would just want to list what it is that you're attaching. Make sure you label it. Any questions here?
Hey, Nicole, what if they can't get a hold of police reports? Because there's no PSI, and sometimes you can get them and sometimes you can't, depending on the agency.
I would assume if they're new enough that somebody's going to have a copy of something. And a lot of them, if you guys have access to iCourts where you can get the documents tab, that's where I get the majority of the ones. Like if I don't have a PSI, I go into iCourts because we have like the certain login where you can get the documents, and I can go in and get the affidavit off of iCourts. I don't know if everybody has that sort of access.
Yes, the misdemeanor POs all have that extended access. I just know that in every case it's not there.
Correct. I have had those ones,
Yeah.
but if they're not in iCourts, then we have to reach out to the arresting agency and ask for a copy of a police report. I don't think I've had one like where there's just absolutely nothing for a really long time. Usually there's something.
They usually, it's sometimes that they won't release them, or they won't release them timely. You know, you wait for the records to be released, and sometimes that's a thing.
Okay. I don't know, because I know that if we submit this transfer request to another state and it doesn't have a police, they're just going to send it back to us, or they're going to
Gotcha.
deny it. I got to have something. It is a
Gotcha.
required document that I have to have on the transfer request. So,
But if it's not happening, if nobody is running up against that, then maybe it's just not a thing. But
yeah.
Historically, it's
Judy,
occasionally come up that people can't get those records.
Well, and I know when you do public records requests, there are timelines. So if they're not following their timelines, then that's an issue that would probably need to be corrected. I guess I don't know how you'd go about doing that, but
yeah, it's just a timeliness thing.
Yeah. Can we use the affidavit of probable cause? Yes, the affidavit of probable cause, like I have here with this guy, I attach the affidavit of probable cause. So yes, as long as it gives a written out description, they put, can we use the affidavit of probable cause in that case? The answer is yes, as long as it gives a written out description. Those are just our options of things that I usually see that have written out descriptions are PSIs, police reports, or an affidavit of probable cause. So yeah, those are great to use.
Hey, Sean, did you have a question? You came on and then went off.
Yeah, I was going to kind of go along with what your question was. So there are cases that we do see, not all the time, but sometimes, where they're like DUIs or something where they would be in another state, but the only document we have initiating the case is a citation. So if all we have is a misdemeanor citation, they go in at arraignment, they plead guilty, they get sentenced right there at the window. We have no PC affidavit, we have no police report, because none was generated on the citation. And so now we've got to get all that done, and the public records request may not come in with anything at all. So do we just attach the citation?
We could, but what the rules state that we have to provide as part of the rule definition is that what they're looking for is a written out description of what occurred. So like if somebody has a DUI and is getting charged with a DUI, are you saying they just get a ticket?
Sometimes. On a misdemeanor DUI, sometimes they just get a ticket. That happens quite often.
Huh. Well, then I would obviously attach a copy of the citation, but then we also need to give them something that is like I said, the written out description of what happened. Like they want to know, he or she was driving down the road and got pulled over at whatever, and whatever tests were done, and they blew a whatever point, whatever. And we did these sobriety tests, and we determined them to be under the influence, and they were released or arrested or released with a ticket. I don't know, but we have to give them that because that's what's in the rule. And if it's not, if we don't give them that, then the other state's just gonna send it back into or deny it. So whether we write it out ourselves, in that case, if there is truly only just a citation, you could maybe just type something up and explain that all we have is this citation. There is no written out description. So here's what we've written out. But, you know, what did Margaret always used to say? If it's available, then it's attainable, or whatever, that we could get it. So if something is out there and we can get it, then we need to get it. Like, so if there is a police report, then we need to get it and attach it. If there is an affidavit, then we need to get it and attach it. We obviously can't give them something that we don't have. So, you know, if that situation just comes up, I would just maybe email us or call us and we can figure it out together. So, but in this section is your catch-all section. Excuse me. Any other things that you need to put in there, you can put in this section. So, was there any other questions?
Nicole, we're about to run out of time, so I wonder if maybe we should just ask if people have any sort of final things that they'd like to see
What
demonstrated.
time are we going to be done? At 1:30? I
Yeah.
can get through these last couple don't take very long.
Okay.
I swear.
Okay.
So supervision history is for people who have been sentenced longer than 30 days ago. So if the sentencing date is longer than 30 days ago, we have to provide supervision history. Whether that supervision history is they've been serving jail time, or, you know, but if you have somebody who's been on your caseload for a long time, we want to let them know how they've been doing, what conditions of supervision they've completed or are in the process of completing, those sorts of things. That's the information we're looking for in this section. Financial obligations, obviously, if they owe any court fines or fees, you would mark yes. And then you could put in how much they owe and who it gets sent to and all that information. Conditions of supervision, obviously in this section, you're going to attach your court orders, your agreement of supervision, things like that. Anything that lists any conditions that need to be followed. Yep. And then a photograph. I'm not going to go in there. We need a photograph. And then the last thing is the offender's application form, which is what they have to sign. It's the waiver of extradition. Please make sure that if the offender is signing, make sure that you're dating your witness signature the same date as the offender's signature. And we get that all the time, where the signature date for the offender is dated one day and then the officer's signature is dated another day. Just make sure they're dated the same. I don't know how to get back up there. How did it go? How do you get that thing to go away? Okay, sorry, hold on. I don't know what I did. Okay, anyway, so that's there we go.
Yeah.
Pretty much it. There are compact action requests, which is what we call CARs. It's how the other state communicates with you. So if you ever get a notification in your email that a compact action request has been submitted, please, this is me on my knees begging you, please go in and read them and respond to them. They are important. The other state is needing something from you. Even if they're letting you know something, every compact action request requires a response. Whether your response is thank you, you know, okay, noted, whatever. So like a compact action requests are these things right here. So I sent a compact action request to the other state asking that they have this guy sign his form. They wrote back saying, why aren't you submitting reporting instructions? So you have to go in and respond to all of those. I've seen transfers get denied because a car didn't get responded to. If somebody leaves on reporting instructions or after a transfer's been approved, make sure you submit a notice of departure. If you have somebody who is reporting to you from another state, make sure you go in and do a notice of arrival. The only other thing I want to talk about real quick before we go is unsupervised probation. Unsupervised, they have to have no conditions on. So like if they go to court and they get an unsupervised supervision court order, the court order has to have no conditions listed on it. So I don't know, but
Is
if
that
they
in order to
did,
transfer, Nicole, is that what you're saying, to transfer under the compact?
yeah,
There
because
can't be
well,
any-
like let's say somebody qualified to transfer, and because we've seen this a lot, where they're trying to circumvent having to go through the compact, so they go and oh well, we're now on unsupervised. We got unsupervised, but then the judge ordered that all of the conditions remain in place. They, per the interstate rules, that person still qualifies to transfer under the compact, even though they're on unsupervised. But if they have conditions that are listed, they still have to transfer under the compact. So anyway, does anybody else have any questions? Ta-da.
No questions, anyone?
And
not
I would
seeing-
just say, I get a lot of things where people will ask me questions and I'll go, oh, it was listed on your handout. Like really, truly, like the very first time you go to do one, if you don't do them very often, sit with your checklist and go section by section, because the most important things I've highlighted or I've bolded or it's in there somewhere. So anyway, just take a gander at it. That's it.
Well, with assuming no questions, no one's coming off mute or nothing in the chat. So I will just say thank you, Judy and Nicole. We appreciate your time so much. I encourage you all, if you have other questions that come up later, especially if they're not on the cheat sheet that you got. And if you don't have that, let me know, because it went out earlier today, but I'm not sure it got to everyone. So if you didn't get it and you need it, just shoot me an email or whatever. I'll forward it to you. But I also encourage you to reach out to the Compact office. They are very, very helpful and they know all the answers. So again, thank you. And if you need to refer back to this video, it will be on the Association of Counties website under the misdemeanor probation section, probably in the next couple of days.
Thank
Great.
you.
If you start something and can't find it, call me.
Okay.
Don't create
Thank you
lots
so
of stuff.
much.
Thanks. Bye.
Good to see you guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I can't figure out how to get out of here though.